Okay, thank you everyone. Giving it a couple of minutes for people to join, and I think we will start now. So welcome to our next webinar of Eyes Wide Open. So the Eyes Wide Open series is a sort of moment where we get to address some of the tricky issues that we're faced with in market research and how we should go about doing it. And this series of Eyes Wide Open is concentrating on our diversity and inclusion agenda. So what we're doing is we're getting experts from market research, but also from adjacent industries to share best practice on how to improve diversity and inclusion in our industry. This is the third webinar in our series. We have Jennifer and Sharon joining us today. Our first webinar was with Asad Dunna, who's the founder of the Unmistakable, who talked about all his experiences of working at Pride London and as a PR agency in the Unmistakable, and how he was helping organizations change from within. We then, in our last webinar, we had Gotche from Unilever, who talked about the way that Unilever are moving towards a model of equity instead of diversity and inclusion, and what they're doing there, which was wonderful. And today we have Jennifer and Sharon, who will introduce themselves in a moment. And the reason we have two people is because we are adopting a format which is a bit like chain reaction for those Radio 4 geeks out there. So we have the experts interviewing the experts. So Jennifer will be interviewing Sharon today. It should last about 45 minutes in total. We've got about sort of 20-25 minutes of content lined up, but the rest of the time is for you to ask questions. So use this as an opportunity to pose all of your questions to Sharon and Jennifer about, getting their thoughts on it, because it's a wonderful opportunity to pick their brains. When doing so, please use the chat function in Zoom, and when you go to that little box in the chat function, you should be able to. You should find a little slot that says type message here. Just above it, there's a drop down. And that drop down, please choose all panelists and attendees. That way everyone can see the questions that are coming up, not just the panelists, because some people might be asking similar questions. Some other people on the webinar may have similar experiences as well that you may want to chime in with. So the chat function is, lockdown's version of a good discussion. So please do use that. And that's my housekeeping. So I'm going to hand over to Jennifer and Sharon, sorry. It's who will be taking us through this webinar. Apologies, I leave it to you two. Thank you.
Thanks, Ollie. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm Jennifer Simon. I'm a senior consultant at CrowdDNA. We're a cultural insight agency where I specialize in semiotics. I'll be presenting some of my work next month looking at the semiotics of colorism and its implication for brands. So I hope you join us then. But for today, I'm here with Sharon Lloyd Barnes. Hi, Sharon.
Hi there, Jennifer.
So Sharon, let's start this session by getting to know a little bit about you. So who you are, your current role, and how your background has influenced your career. Would love to hear more about that.
Okay, so I'm Sharon. I'm the Commercial Director and Inclusion Lead at the Advertising Association. That's the UK trade body for advertising in this country. We represent the whole of the ad industry, and our memberships covers all the sort of stakeholders from agencies, brands and media owners. And I guess our job is to sort of make a case for advertising and protect it against sort of regulatory issues, etc. And provide a forum and create one voice for the industry. How my background has shaped I love this question. Well, actually, in terms of the work I'm currently doing on inclusion, I think it's really driving me in that area at the moment. I grew up in Scotland, so I've got a bit of a sort of I've covered my accent well over the years, and I moved to London at 18, so I made a decision. I didn't want to go to university. I wanted to come down here and start working, and I didn't go to a private school either. I went to a sort of local school in Edinburgh. And what I've noticed, and particularly now that I'm doing this work, I'm really immersed in this work on inclusion, is that I have probably faked it to make it for most of the last 35 years, because most of the people I work with have had a very different background. And it's just really intrigued me that it's only now that I'm able to sort of be quite authentic about, you know, who I am and where I came from. I mean, my first job at 18, I learned to type in about 3 months and got a job as a secretary for a big sort of top 10 ad agency in central London. But within a couple of years of being there and sort of working in the media department, realised and I loved the industry, but I moved into sales. So my career really, most of my career was in media sales, and I moved from London to New York quite quickly in my early 20s to run a sales team. So yeah, it's definitely impacted how I feel about the work I'm doing now.
Yeah, and New York in your early 20s, that's
yeah,
I'm sure that was an adventure.
It was an eye-opener.
Definitely. And Sharon, so would you like to take us through kind of like your presentation? And we're going to make this as casual as we go along, and I can ask you questions along the way. And also, please feel free to put your questions in the chat box as well.
Great. This is where I hate doing this sort of multitasking, but I'm hoping this is working. So are you seeing the whole screen?
I am seeing your
Hooray!
whole screen now.
That's my, okay, sweaty palms over. So well, what I wanted to talk to you, Jennifer, and everyone else on the call about was our All In campaign. This is the big sort of inclusion initiative for the UK ad industry. We kicked off the campaign back in January, but just to take a step back and sort of set the context, we have a working group which is represents the whole industry at the AA, and we know that advertising reflects society and occasionally it shapes it. So it was really, really important for us that our workplace did the same thing. We know that if our workplace is as representative as possible, then it will come through in our work. And that whole conversation has really gathered a pace over the last 12 months. So within setting up the group in May last year to coming up with the idea of the campaign, it was a very short space of time. And it's a collaboration between the Advertising Association, which, as I say, is this kind of like bird's eye view almost of the ad industry. Two of our biggest members, the IPA and ISBAR, who between them represent the ad agencies and the advertisers. So it's a pretty powerful cohort. We have a reach that it's pretty much the whole industry. And we've got quite a lofty aim. We want to create a workplace where everybody feels they belong. So until we've achieved that, we'll just keep running this campaign.
Definitely, yeah. I have a question around that. So, and I know obviously a lot of D&I initiatives have ramped up because of the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd. And I know that you started the census before then. So what kind of led you to the three of you, the three groups, to kind of like initiate that and start that? Because the timing is obviously perfect, but at the same time, you thinking of it before?
Exactly, and it was about 2 months before the murder of George Floyd, but I think already we knew that there was this sea change. And in fact, great question, Jennifer, because it's this slide kind of encapsulates it. We knew that we knew there was a problem, but we didn't know how big it was. And so in order to really get under the skin of that, we needed the evidence. So that was kind of tick for doing the survey, which I'll come on to talk about. And there we go. There's because to date there has been no industry-wide data available. The agencies have kind of tracked what they've been doing since the 60s, actually. But it's at company-held data level, so not individuals. And also it's not a full inclusion index. So it's been just really age, gender, and ethnic background that's been tracked. And no intersectionality within that either. So we knew that this was the first time ever. We also knew that whatever we did had to be completely driven by action. So it was, everybody we pitched this to said, what are you going to do with the data? I hope it's, the start of something. Because as you say, there's definitely an appetite for change, and that's just been accelerated by the events of the last 12 months. And actually Goche's session, the last one of these, she had this great slide about, whenever there's a sort of global crisis or a societal crisis, it really does impact big change. And I think we all recognise that this is golden opportunity for us to build back better, to coin that well-used phrase. It'd be such a missed opportunity to not really, dive in with all the energy that we've got. And then finally, the sort of three components to the campaign was support as well, because we know when you challenge anybody on why there has been such slow progress, particularly across some of the protected characteristics, I was really struck by how many barriers people, some of them are real barriers, but often it's perceived barriers that don't actually exist. And so what we want to do is work with industry, sort of handhold and signpost as many of the initiatives. There's fabulous work going on across the industry. So we wanted to sort of signpost as much of that as possible. Absolutely not reinvent the wheel. So anything we know that's in existence, it's amplifying that and making it and weaving it into this campaign. So so the evidence bit, and I suppose for this audience today, this is the most interesting part of the three parts. We came up with this survey crucially because it's the vital data that we need. We can't benchmark at all unless we know what the starting point is. Also, it was very important to us that we had a neutral, credible and accredited body doing it. So Kantar conducted a survey for us, and it was for everybody with a role in UK advertising. So that was quite a big universe. We created a stop the clock moment where everybody was being asked to sort of down tools and take part, and that was two-pronged really. It was we only came up with that just before Christmas. It was one of the big challenges was we knew there was survey fatigue. A lot of people have been measuring and tracking, haven't they, over the last 12 months, particularly on well-being and internal surveys. So we knew that in order to cut through all of that, we had to do something different. And I really love things like the 2-minute silence on Memorial Day or Remembrance Day, I should say, and even clap for carers. There's something, particularly in this time, about all kind of linking arms. So we created the day on March the 10th, and many companies got involved. I mean, we were slightly overwhelmed actually by how many people involved. Our computer crashed twice, our server crashed twice on the morning of the 10th.
Oh wow.
It was incredible actually. So all the main agency holding groups, all the broadcasters, all the tech platforms, and an incredible list of brands all took part. Wow. And I think another cool thing about having the day is that we did get 80% of our responses on that day. Yeah. We kept it open for another 10, and we did do a bit of a kind of push on social to say it's still you've got 6 days, 5 days, whatever. Right. But it seemed to elevate it and the importance of it today as well. So it wasn't just a practical, tick. It really did encourage people to get involved. And we had some great feedback from the VP of Facebook, for example, in the UK, gave all his staff, we kind of suggested this too, but a lot of leaders gave their staff time in the diary on the day. So they put a calendar invite in. Yeah. And again, just having that, your senior leadership team emphasizing to you how important it was to them and to the company to get involved, it made a big impact. Definitely. Little bit of a kind of sizzle of some of the social that we did. We had some great assets developed for us, and by the way, this was all pro bono, so Channel 4 came up with the name All In. And then they gifted us their design agency to do the branding, which was incredible. Yeah, definitely. And we did create a frenzy. This is one of my proudest achievements, is that we were trending on Twitter in London at #1. Wow. All morning, and that was against the backdrop of, it was 2 days after the royal interview, and it was the day after Piers Morgan had walked out of Good Morning Britain. So I was really,
and y'all were trending. That's amazing.
We were trending #1 above them. So I thought that's an achievement I will take to my grave.
I have a silly question. Are y'all going to keep that March 10th day, or have it around March in that time to
no, that's a good question. Now we're kind of having to sort of slightly do a sort of moonwalk back from it, because it's not a true census, because we're planning to do it in 2 years' time, not 10.
Yes.
But census just sounded much grander. And yeah, I mean, the idea was to do it in 2 years' time. I guess now to hold it on March the 10th makes sense, because we're trying to kind of have created a brand. It makes sense to roll that out.
Indeed, and institutionalize it in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's definitely the idea. And we hope by then, because we've got, well, as you can see here, we've got an all-in action plan, a report. We've got a summit in June to publish all the findings. So hopefully in 2 years' time, everyone will be all over, all in.
And primed for it.
Yeah, and ready for it. And just to go back to the content of it, it was for the first time ever sort of questions across all 9 protected characteristics, and position and salary. And then I think really importantly, a third of it was about your experience in the workplace. So it was, you know, an attitudinal piece really on your experience as how you identify, and has any impact on your progression at work or your experience on a day-to-day basis. So it'll be, I mean, to this day, we still haven't got the whole data set. So that's Monday, I'm going to get them sort of lifting the lid on it. We've got some interesting stories so far, but yeah, really excited about that.
Yeah.
And then the action plan is very much about tackling things, you know, in a really robust and managed fashion. So we're not going to do a big scorecard against, you know, all 9 characteristics. It's just I think that's part of the problem to date, is it is overwhelming. But we've pulled out 3 specific areas that we know, not just the evidence cements it, but the industry have kind of bubbled them up to the top, if you like. So it's Black representation specifically, social mobility and disability. So it's kind of listening to the mood of the country, but the industry, and then supported by the data. So that's our sort of volume 1, if you like.
Right. I was thinking about that just in terms of how you kind of divvied up the groups and differentiated, you know, disabled and Black participants, et cetera. And I remember Asad's presentation, which was the first one in the series, and he highlighted the fact that, you know, the term BAME, for instance, tends to kind of like homogenize, you know, all, you know, racial and ethnic groups and their experiences as kind of one. So I'm glad that kind of like the census is teasing out the nuanced experience of particular groups and other protected characteristics. But given that, how do you think intersectionality factors into the census, and does it reflect it? So, you know, for instance, does the census reflect someone who is Black and, you know, Black and disabled, you know, for instance?
Absolutely. So yes, I mean, we were very, very careful to mirror the questioning with the ONS national census, so that we had, when that comes out, I think it's next year actually, their results come out. So currently we're comparing it against the 2011 census for sort of national average. But you're absolutely right, with questions like ethnic background, it's much more broken out now. And so we've matched it exactly to the ONS so that we can, you know, make a direct comparison. It was very important for industry to be able to compare to national average. And yes, the intersectionality, I think that's going to be the richest part of this, because the attitudinal section at the end goes through each protected characteristic and measures against your experience in the workplace. So for example, have you been discriminated against because of your ethnic background? And then 2 questions later, because of your disability. So when you mash it all together, we'll get some very rich data indeed. Looking forward to that. So moving on to why we're doing this. I mean, I wanted to kind of talk about a real life example and a sort of timely example of why this is so important. It's obviously important to us as people to do the right thing, and it's societally, you know, I think we've seen that movement, particularly in the last 12 months. You know, everybody matters. And we're just a lot more aware of our fellow global citizens. So that's fantastic. We're definitely well on the way in terms of intention. But for us as an ad industry, it's really important that our work is representative. We know, and again, there's a lot of work being done at the moment. We're waiting to get some stats for our event in June that demonstrate the business case for this. But we do know from the trust work that we do that consumers, i.e. us, really respond well to purpose we still call it purpose-led advertising, but it isn't. It's just representative advertising.
Yeah.
And I think the really good examples of where that is promoted and amplified are things like the Channel 4 Diversity in Advertising Awards. They've been going for sort of 5 or 6 years, so it's not a new thing. Channel 4 are a really progressive company anyway. But I love the fact they're leading in this field. There is also a huge amount of work being done with various measurement tools through BAFTA to measure sort of on-screen representation and talent, and diverse talent, which is great. And also the Advertising Standards Authority is looking at new rulings around ethnic stereotyping. 2 years ago now, they introduced gender stereotyping rules so that you would never see ads portraying men or women in certain, stereotype roles. So that was really progressive. And as I say, now they're moving on to ethnicity. But I'm putting out Channel 4 because at the Ad Association, we've been quite involved in this. We've sat on the judging panel since it started. And this is just an array of some of the winners. So it's an incredible prize. They get £1 million worth of airtime on Channel 4. And with each one of these, there's a different story about how it's impacted the brand. So it's not just great free airtime. It's really changed perception in society of whether it's disability, same-sex marriages. There was a great RAF campaign that where it saw, because it's for women, because in the ad they showed women doing lots of different roles within the RAF. They had, I think it was a 30% uplift in women, enrolling for jobs there. So it really has a, societal impact as well as business.
Definitely.
Business case.
Yeah.
So I was going to talk about specifically last year's award, and you mentioned something, Jennifer, which I've got to caveat this when I share the next slide, because so these are the slides that came from the ad agency Adam and Eve DDB who won, and the client was EA Sports, FIFA. It was pretty unanimous, although it did boil down to sort of 2 hours debate on 2 other, and in fact we gave them sort of runners up, so they both got sort of £300,000 to spend as well. So it was an incredible category. But you mentioned BAME and the contention around that term, and it's so interesting that even in the last, I would say, 3 months, it's now something we wouldn't use as a term. Obviously, in the latest government report, it was criticised, and I get why people find it offensive. It is a real sort of catch-all bucket, and it's not nuanced at all. So, but we're using it in these slides just to caveat, because that was how the award last year was promoted. It was for BAME culture and its representation in advertising. So, because the client was FIFA, Adam and Eve looked at this as, from the football community, and they looked at what they wanted to look at first of all was what BAME, in its catch-all sense, what BAME representation was like. And you can actually see against UK population, it really over-indexes, particularly you've got the players of FIFA, you've got people that actually play the sport, and then you've got the professionals in the top 3 leagues, really, really over-indexing on national average. But that shifts completely when you look at British South Asians. And I just remember on the day being so shocked that, 0.25% of professional footballers in the top 3 leagues, not just the Premier League, are British South Asian. So there's obviously a story there. So that was the research kind of highlighting the issue. And that was the interesting thing in the judging debate, was in the year of George Floyd and Black Lives Matters, shouldn't we be focusing on Black representation for the winner? But we felt so strongly that this story was just really, really powerful. And end to end, the fact that the team that pitched it to us and the director that they were proposing would make it, it was representative throughout the whole process. And even in the pitch team, they had one of the very few British South Asian players in the professional players in the UK in the pitch team to EA, which was incredible. So it's a great story. And the way they wanted to tackle it was with role models. They looked back at the success of Black representation in the sport and realised that was through championing role models. And I think particularly with the South Asian community, it's not just the young men and women that you want to inspire and you know, obviously promote role models for them, but it's also the families and the culture with you know, within their communities, because particularly for that community, professional football and advertising, I know from experience, is not seen as a proper job. So, you know, it's not law or medicine. And so there was a job to do there as well. And then finally, just in terms of tweaking the misconceptions and the prejudices around what a footballer looks and sounds and is. So that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And then just finally on that, the Kick It Out survey that they looked at for the industry, you know, an overwhelming 86% of fans agreed that role models would increase the number of British Asian professionals. And that there's just a real calling out across, you know, the media, the fans, you know, anybody to do with the sport that action just needs to be taken. So
I think we have a question here, which is really interesting.
Oh, great. Sorry,
Sharon. No, that's fine. It's just if BAME is now an unhelpful and limiting term, what is an appropriate alternative? Because I know you mentioned that you've I guess you don't use BAME anymore. What do you use instead?
We've been using for our report and our action plan. I mean, you can split it out and just use the longer terminology, I think, rather than it being BAME. So it's black and ethnic, yeah. But we've been just saying for people from different ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we love an acronym, don't we? We love things to shorten things, but I just don't think it's possible because you're talking about very different backgrounds and very different cultures.
Indeed.
And I feel very strongly, you know, disability is the same. I noticed doing the ONS census myself that disability now embraces neurodiversity as well.
Indeed.
And within neurodiversity, there's an enormous spectrum from dyspraxia to and dyslexia to, you know, learning disability and autism. And I just feel that needs separating out too. I think human beings like to pigeonhole, but I don't think it's going to serve us well as we progress in this area. I think we do need to take a step back and actually work out how we're going to do that.
Yeah.
But that again is why, I mean, Goche and I picked up on this in the last session. It's why there is a big difference between diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
And I guess the more we can focus on inclusion and what that means, the less the terminology and having to break out the different characteristics will matter. I don't know, but what do you think? I mean,
it's really interesting what you say, because I mean, being, you know, from, I guess, you know, minority ethnic background, or because I'm African American, and coming to the UK and kind of this catch-all term BAME, I felt like it didn't really represent obviously my reality. But so I do take your point where you either break out the terms, or I mean, in the US, we say people of color, or as you said, kind of like a catch-all term that recognizes a little bit more nuance, because the acronym, you don't really know what it represents. Acronyms, in a sense, simplify, and that's what it's supposed to do. But I don't think this is a case where you should. So that's my take.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, it's so interesting to get different people's, especially when they identify within the group. I mean, I always struggle with BAME anyway, to be honest. But it's just very recently that it's been deemed kind of not really user friendly anymore. Which is a good thing. It just shows how quickly this is all evolving.
Definitely. I just think it takes away the nuance of kind of like the different minority ethnic groups experiences and racial group experiences. So I think, you know, it in a sense, it becomes a crutch to hide particular issues. And so, it's the teasing out that we need to do more than kind of like the grouping.
Exactly. And I think actually, to your point earlier, I think the intersectionality should be the story, shouldn't it? It should be. None of us are one thing. So again, I just bang on about inclusion and just whatever it takes to work, live, you know, in an inclusive society is what we should be aiming for. So just this is the final slide, because there's a slight anticlimax. I don't actually have the commercial to show you because it doesn't actually launch until April the 23rd. It would normally have launched just before Easter, as all the winners do on Channel 4, but because of the pandemic and production issues. But I think the story is within the data and the insight, because that's why they won. And I really love you to go and watch it. It's going to be on the first break of Gogglebox on April the 23rd. So put it in your diaries, everybody.
So April 23rd on Gogglebox.
Yeah, it'll be really worth. I mean, I promised them I wouldn't say what the narrative was, but it's incredibly powerful, incredibly moving. They've used real people in the advertising. And what I love about it, and this is my sort of final word on it, is that authenticity is really, really important, and it was just innate in this whole sort of pitch. But what I love about it is it's classic advertising for now, is that it's not just about selling video games. They want to transform the sport. And I think that's an incredible ambition. And it does go to show that when advertising's done well and done with authenticity, it can achieve incredible things. So yeah, I really hope you like it when it comes out. And yeah, it's very real.
And I think
that's it.
Yeah, no, I think this case study is a really great example of showing that we're, thankfully moving away from tick box exercises around D&I, so such as tokenization and embracing more authentic portrayals of various groups. And how do you think we can achieve more authenticity in ads? Because I know you've seen a lot of them, and you've seen what works and what doesn't. And what are, in your opinion, the rules for kind of getting the balance right, you think?
Well, I think it is just about going as deep as you can in terms of the diversity. So it should start with the team that are working on it. That's the team that are pitching, the marketing team at the brand. Again, going back to Gochi's session, Unilever are making it's quota-led now, isn't it? In terms of their focus groups and their panels, and their suppliers have to demonstrate diversity. And I think we're moving to a place where that is going to be standardized, and something we're hoping to achieve with our action plan. As an example, one of the things we're launching in it is we've decided to focus out of that BAME umbrella. We've decided to focus on improving Black representation for all those reasons we talked about at the top of the call. There's huge movements in the last year. And actually our evidence does, particularly in terms of progression, recruitment levels are actually pretty much against national average in the ad industry, we've seen in our census. But when you look at C-suite, the representation falls very, really low. And so we are partnering with an alliance called BRIM, which stands for Black Representation in Marketing, and it launches in 2 weeks' time. That's going to be our kind of end-to-end solution for the industry. So it's a kind of framework it's a toolkit, lots of resources. It's going to be measured and tracked, and they're going to hope to try and build a community, using it as a framework. So we should in 6 months be able to see how, clearly not from starting to C-suite, that would be a very fast trajectory, but it's really positive. And what I love about it is it's a very clear sort of roadmap. And the idea is that we will then roll it over to other ethnic backgrounds, and then other characteristics like LGBTQ or gender, so we're kind of using it as a bit of proof of concept.
And is that going to follow? Obviously, that will follow from the census.
Yeah, exactly. So that's going to be one of our 3 actions in the first iteration of our action plan. We're going to be tackling Black representation, social mobility, and disability. We severely under-index across those 3 things in various parts of the industry, and it just makes sense. It's what the industry wants us to look at as well. There's a great stat that, again, it's a little bit of a spoiler for the. I was too nervous to put anything on the slide in case, because it's recorded. I'll just say it there. But in terms of people that have gone to private school within our industry, in our census results, we are 3 times more than the national average in terms of private school education. So it's it's balancing things like that, and having so some of the recommendations in the action plan are to have a quota of non-graduate roles across each company each year, and ending unpaid internships as well, because they a bias towards people that can, from backgrounds that can afford to do that. So there's lots of things afoot for that.
Definitely, yeah. And a question around that, and I know there is a question in chat around it, and this will follow. So in terms of what, and so these are, I'm really glad to hear that these are action steps, and these are actionable kind of steps that you're doing to ensure that people at companies and organizations and individuals follow through. How do you ensure that it is followed through? Because there is a lot of talk around it, and the momentum builds, but then sometimes it falls off. And how do you ensure that momentum stays with it and keeps up?
Keeps going.
Yeah, and keeps up. Yeah.
I guess that's kind of where we are in a good position as the AA, because pretty much all the stakeholders in the industry are members of ours.
Yeah.
Not that we're going to make it mandatory to used all the actions and demonstrate that you have, but not far off, I have to say.
Yeah.
I think it's about. We're never going to be able to sort of bully people into doing anything and tell them what to do, and it's not our position to do so. But we know, I used to say this in my consultancy role, the solution is actually within all of us. And we know that everybody has the intention. Everyone recognises this is important. As I say, we've got the business case as well. So there's kind of nowhere to hide. I think our role is to just support everyone in that sort of progression forward.
In the journey, yeah.
And just keep tracking it, keep measuring it, keep reporting in on it, so that if there is a big gap, we're asking industry, well, why is that? What tell us what we can do to help you, because we're the kind of forum to just have this conversation bubble up, and for us to give this bird's eye view of how we're made up.
Okay.
But if there's no progress, I guess it is back to industry to say, well, so what do you think the problems are here? Because we've identified, we've given you the support.
Yeah.
With ensuring the action plan, that's we meet with all of our members all of the time, and it'll be checking in with them to see how they're, so that we've got a plan to do that, whether it works or not. I'll come back in a year and say,
Sharon said this on this date.
yeah, exactly.
I think, let's see, question from the panelists. I wanted to know how you make sure we avoid a value action gap in relation to inclusion going forward. Yeah. So around that.
It's I think it's making people part of the conversation all the time, because this was a really interesting exercise. There were a couple of businesses who are very, very, very verbal and proactive on inclusion internally, but they struggled to engage with this. And they did in the end. We did get everybody, but it was a very, they were the surprises for me, where most of the time it was just, we're doing this, are you in? And we approached all the leaders directly, because we didn't want to just do a market it, fingers crossed. So we did have a very sort of personal buy-in. When we had that sort of pushback almost, and legal teams got involved, and big wider sort of excos, my challenge really internally was, how can this be so important for you that you are purporting it, to everybody, but yet really struggling to engage when the industry is trying to amplify what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so, I guess we'll try and underpin everything we do with that sort of sensibility that, we know this is what you want.
Yeah.
If you're putting a barrier in there, why is that? Because in order to do this, we all need to link arms and do it together.
Yeah.
But it is, the other side of it is a very competitive space. It gives people a commercial competitive edge if they are better than a competitor at this. So I guess I can see why for some people it's very, very hard to go, you know what, we're doing this, we'll share it with the rest of the industry.
Right.
So it's just being sensitive to that, and getting someone put it really well the other day, is everybody's on their own journey with inclusion.
Yeah.
And you have to be compassionate, empathetic, and respectful of that, and kind of meet them where they are and help them forward. So I think
that's a good point. Yeah, definitely. And I think this question speaks a little bit to that on that journey. So there appears to be a bit of a culture battle in the UK at the moment. The antipathy towards wokeness in the right-wing media, government pronouncements on status. We all work in a nice liberal-minded industry where issues of inclusion will naturally be front of mind and something we feel concerned about. But do we really know the non-London public, how the non-London public views inclusion and fiction in advertising? How, as qualitative researchers, do we explore this meaningfully? It's quite easy for people in a group to say the right thing without revealing how it really makes them feel.
Yeah. No, well, there's a few things in there. It's a great question.
I know, that's a really good question.
Yeah, no, it's great. So to unpick a little bit, well, so so this isn't about public, but this was a nationwide census, so our results will be across the nations and regions. And we did get incredible, I didn't say, we got nearly 18,000 responses, and they are from across the country. So and it was anonymous as well. That was the other key thing to say, because that encourages obviously more uptake.
Yeah.
We know about public favourability and trust towards advertising because we constantly monitor that at the AA. We've been doing it since, God, like 30 years or so. And we've actually just commissioned the next round of research is going to look at representative advertising specifically. And it is, again, it's across the whole country. So it's very, very representative views. Actually, positively discriminating, is outside London, I would say, because we're conscious of that. I think, like everything, the pendulum swings too far the other way, and advertising has been criticised recently for going too far in terms of representation. Which is true. I had a couple of letters recently with a lot of statistics, and this chap was saying, I've counted how many Black people, for example, are represented in advertising now against national average. It's like that. And my point was, that's going to happen because everybody's now focusing on doing it. It needs to settle back, and we've done it. We've done it with other things. We've done it with gender representation.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to the authenticity piece. I think you only notice it when it's not done authentically.
Yeah.
When it's just done to tick a box.
Yeah.
That's what jars and people.
Definitely.
You just switched and dropped in a disabled person or whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I think that's really, really important, and it goes back to us just being a much more,
and telling a human story.
exactly that. So yeah, I take the point about the wokeness, and I don't think being stuck at home and so reliant on social media and the crisis that we've all gone through in the last 12 months, I don't think any of that's helped the polarization of views. And it feels like unless you support, if you don't support one thing, it means you are polar opposite, and that I don't think that's helpful. But I do think it's just, again, go back to Gochia's session. She had some very interesting stats on why that happens, and I just think we just have to wait for it to settle a bit, but maybe garner that energy, even though it is quite divisive in some instances, to just make some progress. I think is all we can do, just sort of ride the wave of it.
Yeah, take
but yeah, conscious that it's a little bit, in areas it can be very woke and actually get it very badly wrong.
Yeah. Well, Sharon, I think our time is nearly up, but thank you. This conversation could go on for another hour or two. No, it's been really lovely, Sharon, and thank you for giving us, insight into, the actual work that's being done, in the ad industry and at the ad association, and that intentional drive to make it more inclusive, because, just personally, I believe it has to be backed up by action. And I think, this particular, question around, you can get the views on paper, but if it's not actioned, then it doesn't really make a difference. So, so thank you for your contribution, and, thank you for this conversation as well.
No, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And now my big takeaway is to get a ring light as well.
So we were speaking about this earlier. I have a ring light.
You don't know it, Jennifer. I'm like sitting there next to you going, oh my God.
Oh, no. This is, I had to have it. It's just, I have it all the time. So it's not, and I'm not a vain person. I promise.
Well, if that's, this is an infomercial for ring lights, if nothing else.
Indeed.
But it's like the before and after.
I secretly work for a ring light brand.
Oh,
Listen, I also want to thank you both for a genuinely fascinating and brilliant conversation. It's a wonderful example, as you sort of slightly touched on at the beginning, Sharon, that it's a wonderful way that advertising actually creates culture. You know, as a football fan, I'm going to be looking out for the experiences of South Asians, and I'm going to seek out this ad, and I'm going to seek out how I think it might influence culture as well. So this is where, you know, these are the things that we absolutely need to be looking at, and as qualitative researchers, this is a really obvious way in which we feed into culture as well, which is why these debates and this example is so important. So I want to have a massive virtual round of applause from everyone in their different homes around the place, because this would otherwise have been done in a big room to lots of people, and you would have had a big round of applause. So thank you so much for putting this together. It's hugely important, so thank you. Coming up, a couple of other things that are worth mentioning from the AQR perspective. We have the AQR Parker Prize for Emerging Talent. This is basically finding out our young stars working in the industry and promoting them through the AQR. So please do have a look at that. The deadline for it is next Thursday. So please do have a look out. And if you know anyone or you are a rising star, please do apply for the Parker Prize. It means that you'll get lots of airtime in different places and wonderful recognition. So please do that. And then also next month on May the 12th, Jennifer is in the hot seat talking about colorism in the media, and will be interviewed by Asad Dunna, who gave our very first webinar, who's the founder of the Unmistakable. So please put that in the diary. The link will be coming out shortly as well. And that's all from me. Thank you both very much. That was wonderful. And this has been recorded, so it will go on our website as well. But thank you very much, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ollie. Thanks so much, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thanks, Sharon. Bye, Ollie.
See you soon when we can.
Bye. Yeah, definitely.